The year is 2025. A quiet deadline, one that shaped half a century of global power, has just expired. No alarms, no breaking news, no presidential address. But if you listen closely, you can almost hear the ground shift beneath the global economy. Because the agreement that died this year wasn't just some treaty buried in diplomatic archives. It was the oxygen tank of the American financial system, feeding every dollar you earn, every price you pay, every illusion of stability you still believe in. And now, as the dust settles, you're about to witness something most people aren't ready to comprehend: the unraveling of the dollar's supremacy and the standard of living built on top of it. For 50 years, every barrel of oil sold on Earth was priced in US dollars. Oil became the bloodstream of the global economy, and the dollar became the blood type the world was forced to accept, no matter the cost. But why? Why would nations with their own currencies, Japan, Germany, South Korea, Brazil, use America's money just to keep their lights on? To understand that, we have to rewind to a moment when the world changed in 18 televised minutes. August 15, 1971. President Richard Nixon interrupts regular programming to deliver a calm, rehearsed message to the nation. He calls it temporary. He calls it necessary. But history calls it something else: the death of the gold-backed dollar. Nixon announces the closure of the gold window, ending the system that once allowed foreign governments to redeem dollars for physical gold. Up to this moment, the Bretton Woods Arrangement, created in 1944, forced America to keep its currency honest. For every dollar in circulation, there needed to be gold in reserve. But by the 1960s, the math had stopped working. The Vietnam War, the Great Society programs, explosive domestic spending. America was printing more dollars than it had gold to cover, and foreign governments, France especially, began demanding real metal instead of paper promises. Nixon had a choice: lose the gold or lose global leadership. He chose to save the empire and sacrifice the currency. The dollar was now just paper, a promise without a foundation. And Washington understood the danger immediately. If money is only backed by faith, what happens when the world stops believing? They needed a replacement, not for gold, but for confidence. Something universal, something every country needed, something the United States could control. And by 1974, they found it. Enter Henry Kissinger, the most influential geopolitical strategist of the 20th century. Behind closed doors in Riyadh, he offers Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil exporter, an elegant, ruthless, and world-changing pact. Saudi oil will be sold exclusively in US dollars. No gold, no yen, no pounds, no exceptions. In return, the United States will protect the Saudi monarchy. Military hardware, intelligence cooperation, security guarantees. Through OPEC, this requirement will quietly extend to every major oil-producing nation on Earth. Oil for dollars. Dollars for oil. A closed loop engineered to bind global energy, and therefore global trade, to one currency. It wasn't just a strategy, it was a financial coup. Because oil is not just a commodity, it is the engine of industrial civilization. If you needed oil, you needed dollars. If you needed dollars, you had to buy them, often by selling your own goods to the United States. This meant America could print money without consequence, run massive trade deficits, externalize inflation to the rest of the world, borrow endlessly at near zero real cost. And the world? They played along because they had no choice. This system, now known as the Petrodollar, wasn't simply an agreement. It became the foundation of American empire. More powerful than aircraft carriers, more influential than Silicon Valley, more profitable than Wall Street itself. For half a century, the United States enjoyed a privilege no other empire in history ever possessed: the ability to create money and have the rest of the world treat it as valuable. But like all deals bought with power rather than trust, it came with an expiration date. One few Americans even knew existed. And in 2023, the countdown hit 0. It didn't appear on cable news. It didn't trend on social media. Most people missed it completely. But in financial circles, in the rooms where central bankers whisper and sovereign wealth funds reposition, the message hit like a missile. Saudi Arabia would not renew the Petrodollar agreement. After 50 years, the arrangement that upheld U.S. global dominance simply ended. Quietly, deliberately, inevitably. Because while America was busy consuming, borrowing, and printing, Saudi Arabia was evolving. Over the past decade, they forged deeper alliances with China, coordinated with Russia under OPEC+, expanded investment ties with India, pursued a more multipolar world, and in 2023 joined BRICS, the economic bloc explicitly designed to challenge the dollar. And it didn't stop there. Saudi Arabia began accepting yuan for oil shipments to China. They discussed rupees for India. They explored baskets of currencies and even gold-backed settlement systems. Each decision, small on its own, collectively signaled a monumental shift. Oil no longer needs the dollar, and once oil doesn't need the dollar, neither does the world. This was the beginning of a silent avalanche. A shift so profound it mirrors the end of Britain's pound in the mid-20th century. The same pattern, the same overreach, the same complacency. And like all monetary declines, it starts slowly, but accelerates with terrifying speed. Because confidence, once cracked, rarely heals. And in the halls of global finance, confidence in the US dollar is eroding faster than most people realize. The numbers tell the story, and the story is not good. But to understand why 2025 feels like standing on the edge of an invisible cliff, we need to slow down and return to the cracks that formed long before today. Because the petrodollar wasn't just a deal, it was a lifeline, a silent engine humming beneath global trade, global stability, and even America's political identity. And when engines run too long without maintenance, failure always begins quietly, long before anyone notices the smoke. Let's go back to the early 1970s. A moment when America was desperate, weakened, and cornered in ways people rarely discuss. When Nixon temporarily closed the gold window in 1971, the world didn't just lose gold-backed money. It lost trust. Foreign governments felt betrayed. Economists at the time compared it to a magician showing his audience that the hat was empty. No rabbit, no trick, just a hollow promise. Without gold, the dollar needed a new anchor, something universal, something essential, something that every nation needed every single day. Energy. Oil was the bloodstream of the modern economy. And whoever controlled the bloodstream controlled the body. That's why the 1974 Kissinger-Saudi agreement wasn't brilliant only in geopolitical terms. It was a financial resurrection for a currency that had just lost its soul. Oil became the new gold, and the dollar became indispensable, not because America earned it, but because every nation needed it to keep their lights on. But like every deal forged out of desperation, it contained a quiet expiration. A truth people didn't want to accept. A system built not on value, but on obligation cannot last forever. For half a century, the petrodollar masked America's internal weaknesses. Manufacturing hollowed out, wages stagnated, debt exploded. Financialization replaced productivity. But no one noticed because the world kept buying dollars, buying US debt, buying the illusion. America lived like an empire without consequences. It exported inflation the way factories export CO2. It printed wealth and imported the world's labor. This wasn't just privilege. It was a historical anomaly, the equivalent of Rome receiving tribute without sending legions. But while America relaxed, the rest of the world adapted. China built factories. India built software. Russia built pipelines. The Gulf states built alliances. And as each nation strengthened, the question grew harder to ignore. Why should the world keep using a currency backed by nothing except American promises? Promises that were becoming less reliable with every new war, every new deficit, every new political crisis. The truth is, The petrodollar didn't die in a single announcement. It died slowly, in boardrooms, in back-channel negotiations, in central bank diversification reports, in quiet bilateral deals between countries tired of the dollar's leash. It died in 2014 when Russia was sanctioned and realized the dollar could be weaponized. It died in 2021 when China accelerated one oil contracts via the Shanghai Petroleum Exchange. It died in 2022 when BRICS nations began openly discussing an alternative settlement system. And it died in 2023 when Saudi Arabia made the world-changing decision. They would not renew the agreement. No ceremony, no speech, no headlines. Just a quiet, clinical removal of the system's keystone. And like every great collapse in history, it began not with an explosion, but with silence. The decline in dollar reserves, from 73% in 2000 to under 55% in 2024, wasn't a trend. It was a vote, a global referendum on trust. Central banks weren't diversifying out of curiosity. They were diversifying out of necessity, because they saw what academics warned about for years. A currency backed only by debt and military might is the most fragile form of money ever invented. And the numbers told a grim story. China quietly reducing US Treasury holdings year after year. Russia replacing dollars with gold bars. India experimenting with rupee-based settlements. Brazil, Argentina, Indonesia, South Africa, shifting trade away from Washington's shadow. Even US allies, France, Japan, South Korea, began testing ways to bypass the dollar in energy purchases. Not because they hated America, but because depending on a single currency controlled by a single nation was becoming a structural risk. History repeats itself. The more powerful a reserve currency becomes, the more fragile it becomes once cracks appear. The British pound learned this after World War II. It collapsed not because Britain wished it, but because it could no longer defend the illusion. The US is now in the same position. If global demand for the dollar was the dam holding back inflation, then 2025 is the year the first holes appear. And once those holes widen, the water doesn't trickle. It rushes, because what happens when nations stop needing dollars for oil? Central banks start selling treasuries. Global trade shifts to other currencies. Trillions of overseas dollars return home. Simple. The dollar buys less, then much less, then dangerously less.
No way,
Inflation stops being a yearly statistic and becomes a monthly trauma. This is not abstract. This is the price of your groceries, the rent you pay, the gas in your car, the medicine you rely on. The average American thinks inflation is caused by political incompetence, but the deeper truth is harsher. Inflation is the shadow of a dying reserve currency. The Federal Reserve's impossible dilemma. People still believe the Federal Reserve can fix this, but the Fed was designed for storms, not hurricanes. Its two tools, raising rates or printing money, cannot solve a crisis rooted in global rejection. Raise rates too high, the government cannot afford its own debt. Print money, the world rejects the dollar even faster. There is no button to restore confidence once confidence is gone. The Fed doesn't control this chapter of history. The world does. The elites know, and they've already moved. And this is where the story sharpens. Because while the public still believes nothing is wrong, the wealthy, those who study history, who read central bank reports, who attend closed-door meetings, have already acted. Bill Gates buying farmland, Ray Dalio shifting into gold and foreign assets, Buffett diversifying into Japan, central banks purchasing gold at record highs. They aren't buying optimism. They're buying insurance. Because wealth is not measured in dollars. It's measured in purchasing power. And the wealthy know purchasing power evaporates during currency transitions. They are, quietly and efficiently, exiting the burning building while the rest of the population is still looking for the fire. But the fire is already there, and the smoke is rising. The first domino has fallen, and the next ones are already trembling. The system that held the world together is loosening, and something irreversible has begun. The age of the petrodollar is over. The age of consequence has started.